All right, so Project 3 is a multimedia presentation. And we want you to think of it as if you are giving a presentation in front of a class about the topic you have studied for the past 2 months. And so when you are creating your presentation, that's how you should think of it, to demonstrate what you know, to make sure it's explained clearly, to make sure that if you were sitting in the audience, you would understand it, and that you are telling us at all times that this is now your topic, your understanding, your opinions, so you want to make sure that you make them as clear as possible. So Project 3, multimedia presentation. All right, the goals of Project 3 are, first, it's really broken into 2 halves. First, explore the major developments in historical inquiry. This is where we want you to talk about historical lenses. Everything historical lenses. And I know you're like, we've done that a lot throughout this room. Yes, we have, because it's so important to think about how the way you look at a topic shapes the questions you ask, the information you look for, and what seems to be most important. And so we want to make sure that you have successfully gained those skills. The second half of Project 3 is examining the value of studying history. You have now learned historical thinking skills for 8 weeks. You have developed these historical thinking skills, and you have also studied history, both within the course and on your own over the past 2 months. And now we want you to tell us, is this valuable, and how is it valuable? Obviously, I'm a historian. I think it's completely valuable. But we want to know how you believe it shapes your life and the world around you. So what are the parameters? The parameters of the presentation are pretty simple. We want 10 to 12 slides. You should use a PowerPoint, a Prezi, or if you don't have either of those, you can create them on a Word document, say roughly 2 slides per page, kind of be in your head. And we want it to be a combination of text, visuals, and sound. And for those who have already gotten feedback on your worksheets, and remember when you're doing your worksheet, there was the 3rd column that talked about text, visuals, and sounds. And that's what we want you to think about. You don't need tons of it, but if you have one audio clip, perhaps of the announcement of the dropping of the bomb, or pictures are always great. Pictures are very helpful. But if you also even have movie clips from that time period that depict what happened, that's also great. The ones I'm going to show you tonight, or the presentation that I'm going to show you tonight, largely leaned on visuals and also a great deal of text-based, which is not necessarily a problem, but it can really drive it home more if you have visuals. But for the presentation I'm going to use tonight just really kind of covered all of the content bases we wanted, so that's why I want to use it. Okay, so how to start. With your presentation, you should introduce your topic. You should have a title page with your name on it and the course. So you want to provide a brief overview with a catchy title, and remember you are trying to draw your audience in. I know that you're thinking, but only my instructor is going to see this. But that's not what we want. We want to see as if you are presenting to a room full of people, standing room only. The local auditorium at the local college has invited you to come in and present your topic. How would you do it? You are giving a TED Talk on your topic. How would you do it? That's what we want to get from you guys. So this is the example from the presentation from last term that a student submitted. And so she gave, for the how to start, her opening was secrecy and censorship, effects of radiation, and Hiroshima. So there, right there, we know what she's going to talk about. And then she asked several questions to draw us in. She gives us the big details of what happened. And that just sets the page. Now we know that we're talking about the dropping of the bomb. I realize this might seem silly because you're like, well, all of our topics are about the dropping of the bomb. Right. But again, if you are presenting this before an auditorium of people, wouldn't you give a slide or two of context to make sure that we all know what's happening, that we're all on the same page, that we're all starting from the same page? Yes. So that's exactly what she did, and it's great. And then, all right, but here are the 2 parts. So part 1, historical lenses. For the descriptions, for these descriptions, I literally took them from the proficient column on this assignment rubric. So if you do all of these things, you will score proficient. In order to score exemplary, you have to really add a lot of insight. And actually, I think that's what, in many ways, this presentation did. It added a lot of insight that moves it to exemplary. But you have to do at least these things that I'm mentioning, again, taken from the rubric, to score proficient. So first, you need to explain how various historical lenses can be applied to your topic. Now, this student chose to do one historical lens per slide. Unfortunately, here the picture did not come out. But as you can see, she has the lens. She follows it with information about, so economic lens, she's talking about city infrastructure, loss of people, homes, school, jobs, utilities, public transportation. All of that is going to be an economic, how to rebuild the city. The political lens. And here she's got some great pictures of newspapers and also warnings about enemies. So that, again, really drives home the fact that we're in the middle of a war, or the very end of a war, actually, at this point. We're at the very end of a war. Right there, Shorten's War, Stinson says. This lens can be used to study the players that influence it. So President Truman, the Manhattan Project, American propaganda. That's how she would use the political lens. What if we're looking at it through the social lens? Well, here again, now she's got a very brutal picture of a person who has suffered burns of radiation from the dropping of the bomb. And she says that this is when we start looking at the civilians, if we use the social lens. And we can also look at people back in America and how they viewed what was going on. And so again, I think this is a very good overview of the different questions and topics you might be interested in, depending on which lens you're using. She then decided, here we go. So the next is details how the historical narrative begun in the research and introduction might change through a chosen historical lens. So that research and introduction you wrote for me, I want you to pick one lens and only look at the topic through that lens and see how it changes the way you considered what you wrote. So she wrote about using a social lens and how that's going to cause you to think about the effects of radiation and those that lived with it, the survivors, how they became known as explosion-affected people. The physicians didn't understand what they were doing. All of this is the social lens, which is going to also talk about the culture and views in the U.S. So do you see how she's digging even deeper into how this lens can be used, and she's basing it on the introduction that she wrote. Now, obviously, you guys don't have her introduction. I did. So I know this, but again, look over your past introduction and say, I'm going to pick a specific lens, and if I pick this specific lens, this is what I learn about the topic. All right, next, conclusions. Discusses conclusions drawn about the telling of history in relation to the teller, backed up by information learned throughout the course. So this is where we want you to start thinking about bias and current events. Remember the historical context chart, and we asked you to determine how people are affected by what's going on right now, even if they're looking at something that happened 70 years ago. Well, that's what we want you to do here. We want you to think about all the tellers that you have read about in this course and how they might have been impacted by what was going on. So she called this rethinking history, and she talked about how history can change based on a culture shift. It can be based on your age, your gender, your race, religion, your ideology. The historian's bias, right there. She's gone into primary and secondary sources. She starts talking about slants and how she's now more aware of them. At the beginning of the course, she had said that she felt that a historian is a keeper of information. But by the end of the course, she's now realized that it's not just being a keeper of information. You have to be aware of so much more. You have to take in the norms at the time the source was written and not just what the source says itself. And so again, this is where I'm saying that I found this to be exemplary because she really digs into what these mean for historians, for people looking into history, that you have to be aware of all these different ideas and how they might impact a source and the way we look into history. So that's part one. Those are all the different aspects of part part one that are dealing with historical lenses. So for part one, you want to have slides that cover how three historical lenses would look at your topic. And then you want to go into one historical lens and explain how it would shift what you wrote about in your introduction. And then finally, you want to think about your conclusions. What does this say about how we think about history and the way we should view influences on historians, the teller? Why is it important to know when a secondary source was written? What should that matter? Why does it matter? All of those questions that we've worked on over the past 8 weeks need to be revealed in part one. Part two is now asking you to apply this outside of your topic to the world around you right now and your own personal experiences. So part two is where we talk about value. So first, for part two, we ask you to describe what can be applied from studying the event to current day, referencing specific contemporary issues. So this is very important. You have to include a specific example. And you have to explain why you included that specific example and why it's important and how you can apply what we've learned. So this student used different lenses to examine Black Lives Matter, which is incredibly timely. She used the social lens. She talked about how to use a political lens. She even talked about the current presidential and local elections, different groups such as Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. So she was able to take this issue that is kind of everywhere right now and look at it through different lenses and explain how, if you look at it through this lens, these will be the questions you ask. If you look at it through that lens, these will be the questions you ask. So this really, in a way, this hot topic, she's kind of stepping back, and she's not saying whether or not she agrees with Black Lives Matter, whether she thinks Black Lives Matter is good. No, she's saying, here is how I would look at Black Lives Matter through a political lens. Here is how I would look at it through a social lens. And so even if she has her own personal bias, which, I mean, we all have our own personal bias, she is standing back and she is attempting to use the lenses that we have developed over the past 8 weeks to learn the different ways you might view a topic. Even a topic as controversial right now as Black Lives Matter, as the group Black Lives Matter. So again, this is why this presentation I thought was really good, because she's not trying to impose her own biases, although she has them, we all have them, but instead is looking at it through different lenses and trying to think, what does that mean about the way we talk about it? So the next step is opinion. Explains opinion of the adage that history repeats itself, and then back it up by information learned throughout the course. So this is important. Sometimes students just talk about whether or not history repeats itself, but they don't link it to something within the class. So we're going to see. So history, she chose history repeating itself, and she used pictures of Hiroshima and then pictures from Syria. And she talked about how the military has histories of repeating itself over various issues, and so that's her focus here. Now you'll notice that in this slide, like I just said, she doesn't really tie in what happened or what we talked about in class to this slide. And so that's where you want to make sure that you do that. This would be a slide where she did not earn full credit, because you need to tie it into class. You need to either talk about lenses, or really lenses are the best way, but just different ways that you can think about looking at different ideas and considering them, and sources and historical context. And because historical context changes, does that change how we view the past? Think about that, right? Because how we view Hiroshima and the dropping of the atomic bomb has shifted over 70 years. Well, why has it shifted? Well, because other current events have come along that have changed the way we view it. Or also just now it is more of a memory. And so that has changed the way we view it. So that's the type of thing you want to make sure you tie it into class. So she did a good job here of discussing whether or not history repeats itself, but we need to make it one step further and tie it into what we talked about in class. Value obligation. Discusses the obligation as a citizen of society to understand the history behind impactful issues. So what we want you to think here is along the lines of, should all people have to study history? Should it be considered an obligation, a requirement for people to study history? Now, as I said last week when we went over the worksheet, I've had students in the past who have argued that no, while it would be good, it should not be an obligation. So, again, if you want to argue that and you can prove your point, that is totally fine. Those people still earned credit for answering the question. You don't need to say, yes, it's an obligation. But you have to explain why, you have to explain how terminology matters and what you think. So, in this case, the student said that we do have a responsibility to know society, to know the past, talked about different important figures in history, refugees, immigration. So she's explaining why it's important to her personally, why we should know this. But she starts off by saying very clearly, yes, it's a responsibility. So that's the type of thing you want to answer it clearly, yes or no, and then explain why. You can give personal reasons, general reasons, but you need to give reasons. And that's the last content slide. So now just the last field in all your rubrics, articulation of response. So double check, make sure your submission has no major errors related to citations, grammar, spelling, syntax, or organization. Then submit it. Submit your final presentation. Complete your short answer. Rejoice, for the term is over. Yay! Okay, so do we see what we were talking about? How do you feel about this? Let me know if you have any questions. I am here to answer them. I see some typing. With the historical values slide, do you mean the one on obligation, or let me see if I can go back, or which one? The one on obligation or history repeating itself, or how it impacts our lives? I'm just waiting to see. Oh, to attach voice recordings. Well, unfortunately, Carlene, that I cannot help you with because I'm not good with IT. You could also, if you really can't do it, you could include the link and explain what the text says. Attach like a note to your instructor and explain that, you know, if you were doing this in person, you would attach it this way, but unfortunately, you're unable to. However, this is what it was, and this is why you think it's important. I think that could work. If I received that from a student, I would understand that is not a failure of understanding what we're doing. That's just an issue with the system and computers. Yeah, if they have that, I would use that. I think that would work very well. It is fine to be overthinking the slide. We're historians. We overthink everything in here, right? I mean, I'm totally fine if you're overthinking the slide. But which one is it? Is it the history repeating itself? Is it the obligation? For all of these, I would kind of go with the value one with your first gut response. Obviously, then clean up the grammar. But whatever your first response is, I would go with that, because that's kind of, you know, you've done this course now for 2 months, and it's, how has it impacted the way you think? Has it impacted the way you think? So I would kind of go with your gut response to everything for the values section, and then try to find ways to prove it if something doesn't immediately pop into your head. That sounds good? I think for the values, because it is so opinion and personal, that, yeah, I would really just go with the first thing that hits you. All right, sounds good. Does anyone else have questions? These are good questions, guys. I'm just waiting. I see typing. So how much information versus picture should be on each slide is one question. And for that, it depends. I do think that the text should be more than the pictures. The pictures should be supporting the text, not the text supporting the pictures. Unless you have a really great picture, in which case, give it its own slide with just a title. I think that's completely fine, but you do need the text to answer the question. So I would use more text than that. Hold on, let me scroll up. I see another question I missed. Do we need to supply audio, or is a video audio clip okay? If either one works, so either an audio or a video audio clip should be good. And so how much information versus pictures should be on each slide? Again, I would do it more focusing on the text and then using the pictures to kind of highlight or drive home the idea. No problem. Okay, there's some more typing. No problem. So the audio or video is not technically required. You're not, as I showed you the rubric, you're not going to lose points if you don't have audio or video. So no, if you cannot make that work, that's totally fine. If you can, yay. But if you cannot, then that's not going to hurt you. Okay, do we have other questions? Great, that's awesome. I'm very glad to hear. Someone just said that they're okay now. That's good. This PowerPoint that I was using, that I was taking apart, is also available in the learning community, as is another one. You'll notice that sometimes you'll be like, oh, but this person didn't do this part. And like I did with this one, nope, we have to add things. But overall, I thought she did a really good job, so I figured I could explain what we need to add. Does anyone else have any other questions? Everyone excited to be done? Oh, you're welcome. Is everyone like, yes, gonna submit this? It's gonna be great. You are all very welcome. I know, it's gonna be awesome. This is our last webinar. I am also looking forward to the break. I know, am I not supposed to say that as an instructor? I am also looking forward to the break. But this is our last webinar. Next term, you guys, I don't know, I hope you're taking some more history classes while at Southern New Hampshire. I do teach other classes. I hope to see some of you around. But this is it, guys. This is our last History 100 webinar. I see some typing. Oh, Merry Christmas, Joe. Merry Christmas, Christine. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy holidays. It's a busy time for all of us. No, thank you guys for showing up. Happy holidays, guys. Happy holidays, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording in a minute so we can get this turned into a YouTube video for those who couldn't attend. And everybody, happy holidays out in Southern New Hampshire land.